What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and today we're diving back into the standard format as we are just over a week removed from the November 10th ban and restricted list that ended up banning VV Ornithir from the format, as well as Prophetic Memory and Screaming Nemesis. So we have seen the Is It Prowess decks and the Mono Red decks getting nerfed again, and we now ideally have a wide open metagame and some things to kind of go off of while kind of traveling towards the RCQ season that's going to take place, I believe, starting next weekend and running all the way through March, which I believe, if the dates are right, actually qualify you for Cincinnati, Ohio SCG Con or the SCG Con in Washington, D.C. Both really cool, and who knows, I might actually try to qualify for both of them since they're both relatively close, not like Texas, which was a heck of a drive there. But, you know, to kind of kick us off on this new standard format that we're going to be diving into, of course, we have to talk about Dimir Midrange, a deck that has been really good since the beginning of 2025 and has definitely been on a roller coaster that has been kind of overtaken by, you know, Is It Prowess, Mono Red, at times the self-bounce decks that we've seen from the Dimir mid-range deck, or excuse me, the Domain mid-range decks, not Dimir mid-range. And it's been in kind of a weird spot, and even at a post-rotation where, of course, you know, things like Shieldred were a big part of the Dimir mid-range deck and became less so the more self-bounce and stuff that we had seen. It's back on the menu, and it's been the deck that players have gravitated towards the most. It was the third most played deck before we actually had the ban and restricted announcement, and now it has firmly taken it over, as I believe just in the past week, Goldfish has this at like 36-37% of the metagame. So for probably the second or third time this year, we're going to be talking about Dimir midrange and exactly what the deck is doing to try to attack the format, because I think in this deck's case, it is the one kind of pacing the field rather than it trying to chase the leader at this point. So before we get too deep into today's deck list and we talk about the Dimir mid-range deck, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where we talk mainly about the modern standard formats, as well as some other longer form videos and even some short form content for your viewing pleasure. So that's something that interests you, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a free, easy way to support me and my content. And if you want even more content, go ahead and check out the description down below, where you can go and subscribe to the Casual Spikes Podcast YouTube channel. Follow me on twitch.tv/Crowd823. Join the Discord server, all that fun stuff. Lastly, I want to shout out the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. If you want to play decks like this or any other decks that we show off on this channel, and you don't want to necessarily put all the money up front to buy the cards on a digital client, then Manatraders would be perfect for you. Manatraders allows you to rent cards for various different formats to play whatever decks you want in whatever competitive or even non-competitive formats on Magic the Gathering Online. On top of it, I mean, for me, as a personal tool, being able to show off a lot of these decks, you know, either on live streams or in videos, on top of also being a great tool for playtesting, trying to figure out what decks I'm going to play for the RCQ season, or just preparing for a regional championship or even a regional championship qualifying tournament. Manatraders is perfect for it. And if you sign up using my code in the description down below, you get 5% off your monthly subscription. Again, I want to thank Manatraders for being a sponsor of the channel. Now let's go ahead and dive into this Dimir mid-range deck. So from this challenge in particular that took place on Monday, there was like, I think 2 Dimir mid-range decks that made the top 8, and there was like 3 or 4 in the top 16. So it's a deck that is performing very well and is converting. Obviously, this one being the one that actually won that standard challenge. But we see here, Kaito is still kind of a main fixture of these Dimir decks. A 4 it is a 4 mana for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker, but it has ninjutsu for 1, a blue and a black, meaning that you return an unblocked attacking creature you control to your hand, and then you pay Kaito's cost to then put it into play. During your turn, as long as Kaito has 1 or more loyalty counters on him, he's a 3/4 ninja creature token and has hexproof. So during your turn, it's going to have hexproof, so your opponent is going to have to spend mana on their turn if they're going to be able to kill the Kaito. Of course, they can still attack it like a Planeswalker, but this is a Planeswalker that allows you to kind of maintain the tempo of being aggressive with also 3 very relevant abilities. You get an emblem with ninjas you control getting +1/+1, really going to only affect Kaito, but this is a way that Kaito can slowly grow over time and end up closing out the game just a little bit faster. 0, you surveil 2, and then you draw a card. For each opponent who lost life this turn, a lot of the times that you are ninjutsuing a Kaito, because it's going in unblocked. You're going to be able to deal the damage, and then you're going to be able to surveil to draw a card for 0 mana, or at -2, you tap target creature and you put 2 stun counters on it, which is going to take it out of commission for a while, which in this blue-black mid-range strategy, you're playing this sort of like tempo-y, kind of like aggro, like card advantage strategy. So definitely getting to take your opponent's best creature, you know, essentially out of combat and clear the way for your creatures on future turns, because it is going to be tapped down for multiple turns, makes Kaito a very versatile tool and a very good card to kind of build around in these style of decks. Now, how exactly do you build around a 4 mana and feeling like a technically 3 mana planeswalker? Is playing a bunch of cheap creatures that you don't mind actually returning to your hand that can also give you a little bit of value. Cecil, not technically one cards, but it is a 1 mana creature, fairly aggressive as a 2/3 death toucher for that 1 mana, and then whenever it deals damage, you lose that much life, and then if your life total is less than or equal to half your starting life total, you untap Cecil and transform it. It is a 4/4 lifelink creature that when it attacks other creatures you control, gain indestructible until end of turn. This is allowing you to, you know, just on itself, be able to play out these creatures, again, continue playing that tempo strategy, be able to attack in, and your opponent's going to have to make decisions to make some blocks that, sure, are going to be relatively easy, but having a 4/4 lifelinking creature is pretty big and a little bit harder to beat in combat, on top of, you know, your smaller creatures being indestructible. Some of them are probably just going to get blocked for free, but then your opponent's probably have to make some concessions that they're going to lose combat on some of their creatures, meaning that their board's going to open up a little bit more, and you're going to continue to attack with Cecil and being able to give those creatures indestructible, and again, making it pretty hard for your opponent to actually be able to do anything about your board. But this is also a creature you don't mind returning. I know that we talked about picking up creatures that do give you some sort of value. Picking them up and replaying them, Cecil isn't going to give you that, but is going to be a fairly aggressive 1 mana creature that you're going to play, be able to get some damage in early on, and then don't mind actually picking this up on turn 3 when you attack with your Kaito. Now, for some cards that you really would rather return, cards like Spyglass Siren, Deep Cavern Bat, and Flood Pit's Drowner, even to a point, Tishana's Tidebinder is actually an interesting card that you can pick up. Spyglass Siren has been a staple of the format in multiple different decks. 1 mana, 1/1 flyer. When it enters, you create a map token. Of course, being a flying creature, it's very evasive. It's very likely to go in unblocked, which means you're going to have a pretty easy time being able to put Kaito into play for 3 mana, on top of also just getting to replay this to make another map token, which can either get a land off the top of your deck, and in turn help you find your land drops, which are super important in these mid-rangey like styles. On top of that, you could potentially look for spells and buff your creatures in the process. Deep Cavern Bat and, like, to a point, Tishana's Tidebinders play a little bit differently in this case, because when they enter, at least for Deep Cavern Bat, you're going to be able to look at your hand, choose not only a card from it, and that's for as long as Deep Cavern Bat is on the battlefield, and then they will, you know, return to their hand when Deep Cavern Bat leaves. This is a way that you can kind of take a removal spell out of your opponent's hand, set up for Deep Cavern to attack, and then you're able to return it and put a Kaito into play. You're going to give your opponent the card back, but you have Deep Cavern Bat in your hand, which is going to be able to take another spell out of their hand, potentially meaning the Deep Cavern Bat will end up eating that removal spell and leaving your Kaito free and clear. If not, then the Deep Cavern Bat have an opportunity to take that removal spell and force your opponent to have a second one to deal with the Kaito, and having to do it on their turn as well. Deep Cavern Bat still in play means that you could potentially just put another Kaito into play. So there's definitely the interesting game there with Deep Cavern Bat. Flood Pit's Drowner is a card that's going to tap a creature and put a stun counter on it, and you can pay 2 mana to shuffle it and then a creature with a stun counter into its owner's library. Plays very well with Kaito abilities, but also just being a flash vigilance creature means that you're able to tap an opponent's creature down, attack with this, and then either return to your hand with Kaito, or just be able to activate that ability and get that very problematic creature off the board. Tishana, we talked about being an interesting one. When it enters the battlefield, you can counter up to 1 target activated or triggered ability, and then if that triggered ability came from an artifact, creature, or planeswalker, it loses all of that abilities for as long as Tishana remains on the battlefield. So you can use this to kind of counter an activated or triggered ability that doesn't necessarily turn off a permanent, and then you're able to return this with Kaito to then be able to potentially counter another ability that maybe does shut off a permanent that makes things very problematic for your opponent. This is also a relatively aggressive card, just being a flash creature that you can play on your opponent's turn. 3 power is definitely something that will close out the game relatively quickly, especially in these games that become very much very attrition-y and can cause you to kind of trade off a lot of resources in that way. Speaking of trading off a ton of resources, we get to our top end here in Enduring Curiosity, which is going to help us to kind of recoup a lot of those a lot of those things. The benefit of being like this tempo deck is when like you're playing your card and the specific time that you're playing it is kind of putting your opponent on the back foot and trying to keep them on the back foot. Well, another easy way of doing that is just making sure that while your opponent is down to 2, 3, maybe 4 cards in hand, you're always having a full grip, meaning and seeing more cards, meaning that you're more likely to kind of keep pressuring your opponent and forcing them to have very specific answers to try to get back in the game. Enduring Curiosity does this by giving you this kind of ability. You know, it's a 4-mana 4/3 with flash that whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So if you have 3, 4 creatures deal damage to your opponent, you draw 3 or 4 cards. And the best part about this is that when it dies, if it's a creature, it returns to the battlefield under its owner's control as an enchantment, meaning you still get that effect of your creatures dealing damage and you're drawing cards. Of course, multiple Curiosities also means that you're going to be able to draw multiple cards per creature. There's probably some worry that you could end up decking yourself, but anyway, like you're probably going to win the game at that point by just having enough creatures in play where you're going to end up drawing a bunch of cards and forcing your opponent into some very unwinnable positions. So that's kind of the idea of the deck. You want to use your creatures to kind of gain some tempo here. Get like one or two of these very cheap creatures out early so you can put Kaito into play, start getting a little bit of card advantage going, and kind of locking down your opponent's board, on top of the benefit of being able to just plus this to keep the loyalty high while also making the creature a lot better. The spells are also a good way of kind of helping us to get to that point where we can again, continue to get creatures in the red zone and attack and hopefully not trade them off and then be able to pick them up with Kaito to kind of get back some of those very powerful ATB triggers. We have things like Stab and Bitter Triumph and Nowhere to Run are spells that are essentially removal spells. Nowhere to Run, giving a creature -3/-3 and allowing you to ignore hexproof and ward abilities. Bitter Triumph being something that allows you to either pay 3 life or discard a card to destroy a creature or a planeswalker straight up. Stab just being a 1-mana, give something -2/-2, very good in the early game here. Phantom Interference is a card that has been either really bad or, you know, has just found its way in some number of copies in these Dimir strategies. You know, for 2 mana, you essentially get to quench your opponent's spell, counter it unless they pay 2. Or you can spend 4 mana to make a 2/2 flying creature token, or 5 mana to counter something and then also make a 2/2. So it's a counter spell that has a lot of utility early game, and then late game it just ends up making a 2/2 flyer, so it ends up doing something when you don't necessarily want to leave up mana for the counter part of it. You can just make a 2/2 flyer that also can help with like Kaito and things like that. We see the Sheriff, another removal spell, destroy target non-outlaw creature. Fabloom Trick is one that works very well in conjunction with like Curiosity, while also giving you something to kind of do with Kaito. In instant speed, you create 2 1/1 blue fairy creature tokens of flying, and when you do, you tap target creature and opponent controls. While it doesn't get stunned, it does leave the way open for maybe some of your other ground creatures. Ideally, you don't want to return these tokens because you're not going to be able to replay them later, so you want to be able to tap a creature that's maybe going to trade with, you know, Spyglass Siren or Cecil, Deep Cavern Bat, whatever, or, you know, obviously it's your opponent's last creature, to then be able to get in and then return the actual spell to your hand rather than one of these token creatures. The mana base, we see things like Fountain Port. You can pay 2 mana, sacrifice a token, draw a card, pay 3 mana and a life to create a 1/1 fish token, and pay 4 mana to create a treasure token. This can be something that gives you kind of long-term value here. Of course, we have the tokens made by Fabloom Trick. You also have, you know, technically the tokens from Phantom Interference, and even the tokens that Spyglass Siren makes. You're able to sacrifice those, turn those into cards, or you can just turn, you know, make fish or treasure tokens and turn those into cards later. So definitely something that's a decent card advantage engine, while also technically able to give you a sort of mana advantage in those matchups where you need it. We see Gloomlake Verge. We see Watery Grave as 4-ofs in this deck. Watery Grave, of course, being the blue-black shock land that's going to come play untapped if you pay 2 life. Gloomlake Verge being a land that taps for blue, and then will tap for black as well if you control an island or a swamp. We see Restless Reef has been a land that has been very popular in these decks. It becomes a 4/4 creature. When it attacks, target player mills 4 cards. You can animate it for 4 mana. We see Soulstone Sanctuary becomes a permanent 3/3 vigilance with all creature types. if you spend 4 mana on it. 5 swamps, 4 islands, and then this new card, Multiversal Passage. I say new because it's from the Spider-Man set, and Spider-Man doesn't feel like it came out that long ago. But as the land enters, you choose a basic land type, then you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters tapped, and this land is the chosen type, meaning that if you choose island, it ends up being an island that taps for blue mana. If you choose swamp, it's a swamp that taps for black mana, which also helps out with cards like Gloomlake Verge, being able to tap for black mana, ideally on the second turn that these come down. Or, you know, just tapping for blue mana on the turn that you need it to, and then, of course, playing Multiversal Passage or one of these other cards, so then the Gloomlake Verge can add black mana as soon as possible. Sideboard, we see Duress, Ghost Vacuum, Intimidation Tactics here, which is a discard spell from the Aether Drift set that lets you choose an artifact or a creature card from your opponent's hand, and then you exile that card. 0-point Ballad, being able to destroy all creatures with toughness X or less. You lose X life, and if X is 6 or more, you return a creature from your graveyard put into a graveyard this way from the battlefield under your control. So this is a way that you can wipe the board and then bring back your best creature. You have Disdainful Stroke, Essence Scatter negates as various different counterspells. Strategic Betrayal is a way to make your opponent sacrifice their creature, but then also getting rid of their graveyard for some of the other Reanimator shenanigans. Feybloom Trick as a good tempo play. Preacher of the Schism and Tashawn's Tiebinder running out the sideboard here. And this is a lot, in fact, or a lot to do with the fact that the metagame isn't very clearly defined, but I think Dimir Midrange is kind of the deck pacing the field. And usually these mid-range strategies end up kind of doing that because they're able to play in a more aggressive style, but then also kind of pivot to playing a control deck and have a really good control game plan nonetheless. While this is a deck that does want to slant more towards being aggressive, just with its tempo kind of strategy, Kaito does give it a little bit of long-term longevity for the fact that it can give you some card advantage and some card selection. In the worst case, again, it can just become a very big creature, and even if your opponent does kill it off, you know, again, you're kind of fine with doing the ninjutsu things with Kaito. And even getting to do some interesting things where, like, you can activate Kaito, tag with it, and then put in a new Kaito, so then you can activate the ability again. You know, just some very interesting things that you can have at play here with this very powerful Planeswalker, and just in this strategy in general. You know, if you play your cards right, you know, no pun intended, you are able to, you know, just dump your hand to then, you know, trade it for 3 or 4 cards, and those 3 or 4 cards are going to help you to get 3 or 4 more cards, so on and so on, until your opponent is just completely out of the game and has no way of coming back. But, you know, let me know what you think of this Dimir midrange deck, as always, and any other decks that we talk about on this channel. If there's a specific deck that you want me to talk about in a later video, please be sure to leave those in the comments down below, and even leave me a comment as to why you want to cover those decks here in the standard format, or even modern as well. It's all good to hear. But yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. I can't wait to dive more into the standard format here. Hopefully it's just not Dimir midrange soup, and then everything else is trying to play catch up. But we will have a new deck coming at you next week. So that's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.